The war was already over, they said. Victory had been declared in speeches crackling over radios and shouted from the lips of officers who wanted to believe it. But for Corporal Daniel Mercer, the war hadn't ended. It had simply changed its shape. Germany, March 1945. The snow had turned grey with ash and soot, packed hard into the cobblestones by the boots of men who had marched too long and seen too much. The town didn't even have a name on the maps anymore, just a grid of ruins and a river that carried broken beams and memories downstream. Once, people had lived here. Once, children had run through streets that now echoed with the sound of distant artillery and the groan of collapsing walls. Mercer adjusted the strap of his rifle and scanned the street ahead. His helmet sat low on his brow, shadowing eyes that had aged 10 years since Normandy. He was 23. He felt 50. "Keep it tight," Sergeant Collins muttered behind him. "Last thing we need is some fanatic with a pistol thinking the war ain't over." Mercer nodded. Everyone knew that kind of danger still lurked. Desperate men, starving men, men who refused to surrender even when the world had burned around them. But the silence in this town felt different. It wasn't waiting to strike. It was already dead. The squad moved slowly, boots crunching over shattered glass. Windows gaped like empty eye sockets. A church steeple leaned at an angle that defied physics. Its bell cracked, mute. The smell hit Mercer next. Cold smoke, rot, and something sour beneath it all. Hunger had a smell. He'd learned that in the Ardennes. A baby cried somewhere. The sound cut through the air like a knife. Mercer stopped without meaning to. Collins raised a fist, signaling a halt. "You hear that?" Mercer asked quietly. "Yeah," Collins said. "Civilians." A private spat into the snow. "Jesus! Thought they all cleared out." "Not everyone gets the luxury of leaving," Collins said. "All right. Mercer, you and Hayes check it out. Careful." Mercer exhaled and stepped forward, rifle at low ready. The cry came again, weaker this time. It led them toward a half-collapsed row house. The front door hung open, one hinge blown clean off. Inside, the air was colder, the walls blackened by fire. They found her in what had once been a kitchen. She was thin, too thin, wrapped in a grey coat that might have belonged to her husband or her father, or someone already buried beneath the rubble. Her hair was dark but streaked with white, pulled back in a hurried knot. In her arms, a baby no more than 6 months old whimpered, its face pinched and red from cold. When she saw the uniforms, she stiffened. Mercer froze too. This wasn't a soldier. This wasn't an enemy with a weapon. This was a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks, staring at them with eyes that carried equal parts terror and resignation. She spoke in German, fast and urgent. Mercer didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Pleading, begging. She sank to her knees. Hayes swore under his breath. "Oh, hell." The woman bowed her head, clutching the baby tighter. Her voice broke. She held out one shaking hand, palm up, miming eating. Food. Mercer felt something twist inside his chest. Orders echoed in his mind. No fraternization, limited rations, civilians to be directed to relief units when possible. They were stretched thin already. Supplies barely made it to the front. Men were still dying, even now. But this wasn't a policy problem. This was a human one. Mercer glanced at Hayes. The kid looked away, jaw clenched. "Danny," he whispered. "We don't—" "I know," Mercer said. The baby cried again, weaker than before. Mercer knelt slowly, keeping his movements calm. The woman flinched, as if expecting a blow. Up close, he could see her hands were cracked and bleeding from cold. Her eyes flicked to his rifle. He reached into his pack. The woman gasped. Mercer pulled out a single ration bar, still wrapped in wax paper. Chocolate. High calorie. Worth its weight in gold. He hesitated for half a second, thinking of the march ahead. the nights sleeping hungry. Then he broke it in half. He held one piece out gently. The woman stared at it as if it might vanish. Slowly, carefully, she took it, her fingers brushing his. She whispered something, maybe a prayer, maybe a thank you. She broke off the smallest piece and pressed it to the baby's lips, dissolving it with a bit of water from a cracked cup. Mercer watched the baby suck weakly, then settle. The woman's shoulders collapsed inward. She started to cry, silent at first, then shaking, tears carving clean lines through the grime on her cheeks. Mercer didn't know where to look. "Mercer!" Colin's voice snapped from the doorway. "What the hell are you doing?" Mercer stood. "She's starving, Sarge." Collins's eyes flicked to the baby, then back to Mercer. His jaw tightened. "We don't have enough for everyone." "I know," Mercer said, "but we have enough for this." For a moment, no one spoke. The war pressed in on them. The ruins, the cold, the weight of everything they'd done and lost. Collins exhaled sharply. 5 minutes, then we move. The woman looked up, confusion crossing her face as the soldiers began to leave. Mercer paused at the door. Something in her eyes stopped him. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded photograph, edges worn soft. She held it out to him. A man in a German uniform stared back, young and proud, one arm around her shoulders. "My husband," she said in broken English. "Gone." Mercer swallowed. "I'm sorry," he said. She nodded, as if sorry was all the world had left to offer. As Mercer stepped back into the grey daylight, the baby's crying had stopped. Behind him, the town remained silent, holding its breath. And Mercer couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this small, human moment, was about to change everything. They left the town behind at dawn, the sky low and heavy, like it might collapse under its own weight. The road east was a ribbon of frozen mud, churned by tanks and refugee cars alike. Corporal Daniel Mercer walked point, his breath fogging the air, the strap of his rifle cutting into his shoulder with every step. No one said much. Whatever had passed between Mercer and Sergeant Collins, back in the ruins, lingered like smoke. Not anger, something worse. Doubt, the kind that crept into a man's bones and stayed there. By mid-morning, they passed a column of German civilians heading the opposite direction. Old men pushing wheelbarrows, women pulling children wrapped in blankets too thin for the cold. No flags, no guards, just people moving because standing still meant dying. One little girl stopped and stared at Mercer as they passed. Her face was smudged with dirt, her eyes far too calm for her age. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She just watched him, like she was memorizing the shape of his face. Mercer looked away. "Don't let it get to you," Private Hayes muttered. "They ain't our problem anymore." Mercer didn't answer. He wasn't sure he believed that. The first shots came just after noon. A single crack echoed from the tree line, sharp and unmistakable. Mercer dropped instantly, rolling into the ditch as bullets snapped overhead, chewing bark off trees and throwing up bursts of frozen dirt. "Contact right!" Collins shouted. The squad returned fire, rifles barking in uneven rhythm. Mercer sighted in on a flash of movement between the trees, a shadow slipping back, too quick to pin down. "Fanatics," Collins growled. "Probably Hitler Youth or leftovers who didn't get the memo." The firefight was brief, but vicious. The enemy didn't press. They fired enough to remind the Americans the war still had teeth, then vanished into the woods. When the echoes faded, the silence felt heavier than before. Hayes checked his ammo, hands shaking. "That's it? That's all?" "For now," Collins said. "Mount up. We keep moving." They found the body an hour later, a German soldier, no older than 17, slumped against a fence post. His rifle lay untouched at his feet, a single bullet hole marked his chest. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. Mercer crouched beside him. The kid's uniform was too big, sleeves rolled up. In his pocket, Mercer found a crust of bread, hard as stone. He closed the boy's eyes. That night they bivouacked in a bombed-out farmstead. The roof was gone, stars glaring down through skeletal beams. A fire burned low in a makeshift pit, barely enough to warm hands without drawing attention. Rations were passed out, 1 can per man. Mercer stared at his tin of beans, appetite gone. The baby's face kept flashing in his mind, the way the woman's hands had trembled. "Eat," Hayes said. "You'll need it." Mercer nodded, but didn't open the can. Across the fire, Sergeant Collins watched him. "Walk with me," Collins said after a moment. They moved away from the others, boots crunching softly. Collins lit a cigarette, the glow briefly illuminating the deep lines in his face. "You think I didn't want to do what you did?" Collins asked quietly. "Back there?" Mercer swallowed. "Didn't say that, Sarge." "Didn't have to," Collins said. "Listen, I've got 2 kids back in Ohio. You think I don't picture them every time I see one of those civilians?" He took a drag, exhaled slowly. "But my job is to get my men home alive. Every ration we give away, every minute we stop, it adds up." "I know," Mercer said. "I just couldn't leave her." Collins studied him for a long moment. Then he flicked the cigarette into the snow. "War's ending," he said. "But what comes after? That's the part nobody trains you for." Later that night, Mercer woke to the sound of boots. He reached for his rifle, heart pounding. Shapes moved beyond the firelight. Whispered voices, German, refugees. A small group had crept toward the farmstead. 3 women, an old man, and 2 children. They froze when Mercer stood, hands raised instinctively. "Bitter," one of the women whispered. "Food." Collins emerged from the shadows, weapon low, but ready. "Jesus," Hayes muttered behind Mercer. "It's spreading." The refugees dropped to their knees, fear written on every face. One of the children began to cry. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Collins did something Mercer didn't expect. He knelt. He opened his pack and pulled out his ration. He broke it cleanly in half and handed it to the nearest woman. "Take it," he said gruffly. "Then go. Head west. Find the Red Cross." The woman pressed her forehead to the ground in thanks. Word spread fast after that. The next day, more civilians appeared, always cautious, always desperate. Mercer and the squad shared what little they could, directing them toward aid stations, lying when they had to. But supplies ran thinner. Tempers grew shorter. On the 3rd day, an officer from battalion arrived in a jeep, face red with anger. "You men think you're running a soup kitchen," he barked. "We've got reports of ration shortages and civilian interference." Collins stood at attention. "Sir, with respect..." "With respect, nothing," the officer snapped. "Orders are orders. No more handouts. Anyone caught disobeying will answer to me. Clear?" "Yes, sir," Collins said. That night, Mercer lay awake, staring up at the ruined beams overhead. Hunger gnawed at his gut, but it wasn't what kept him awake. It was the memory of a woman on her knees in a ruined kitchen. And the knowledge that tomorrow, if she came back, he might have to turn her away. Outside, the wind howled through the broken walls, carrying with it the distant rumble of guns that refused to fall silent. The war wasn't done with them yet. The ambush came at dusk. It always did. The light was dying, bleeding out behind the trees, when the first explosion ripped through the road ahead. The blast flipped the lead jeep like a child's toy, fire blooming outward, swallowing metal and flesh in one violent breath. The shockwave hit Mercer square in the chest and knocked him flat on his back. "Down! Down!" Collins roared. Gunfire erupted from both sides of the road, short, vicious bursts from concealed positions in the forest. Tracers stitched through the air, red lines cutting the twilight to ribbons. Mercer scrambled into the ditch, mud soaking through his uniform as he brought his rifle up and fired toward the muzzle flashes. This wasn't a handful of fanatics. This was organized. "Left flank! They're flanking us!" Hayes shouted. A scream cut through the chaos. One of theirs. Mercer caught a glimpse of Private Donnelly spinning, clutching his neck, blood spraying between his fingers before he collapsed into the mud. "Medic!" someone yelled, panic cracking their voice. Mercer fired until his rifle clicked empty, hands moving on muscle memory alone as he reloaded. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. The forest seemed alive with enemies, shadows darting between trees, impossible to pin down. Then, through the smoke and noise, Mercer heard something that didn't belong. A child crying. His head snapped toward the sound. Beyond the wrecked jeep, down the slope near the river, civilians were scattering in. Women, children, refugees who had been following the road, hoping for safety in numbers. Now, they were caught in the open, trapped between gunfire and water. "Jesus Christ," Hayes gasped. "They walked right into it." A woman stumbled, fell. Another tried to drag her up as bullets kicked dirt around them. "Forget them!" Collins shouted. "We hold the line!" Mercer's chest tightened. The memory slammed into him without warning. The grey kitchen, the starving baby, the woman's shaking hand. A round cracked past his head, snapping bark inches from his face. "Mercer!" Collins barked. "Eyes front!" Mercer hesitated. Then he made a decision that would follow him for the rest of his life. He bolted. "Mercer, get back here!" Collins yelled, fury and disbelief colliding in his voice. Mercer ran downhill, boots slipping in the mud, rifle slung as he waved his arms at the civilians. "Go! Run! Get down!" he shouted, hoping his tone meant more than his words. A burst of machine gun fire chewed up the ground beside him. Mercer dove, rolling, heart slamming against his ribs. He came up firing, aiming at a shadow near the tree line. The figure dropped. The woman he'd seen fall was still on the ground, frozen with terror. Mercer reached her, grabbed her arm. "Move!" he shouted. She stared at him, eyes wide, not understanding. He hoisted her up bodily and shoved her toward the riverbank. "Down there! Go!" Another explosion rocked the road behind him. He risked a glance back, his squad still fighting, muzzle flashes strobing the darkness. A scream erupted to his right. The baby, the same baby. The woman from the ruined kitchen stood just yards away, clutching her child, paralyzed as bullets cracked overhead. Recognition flashed across her face when she saw Mercer, shock, then desperate hope. Mercer sprinted to her. He threw himself over them as rounds snapped through the air, his body a shield he hadn't consciously decided to offer. Dirt and splinters rained down. The baby screamed, then fell silent. Mercer's ears rang, his arm burned. He looked down. Blood soaked his sleeve, a graze along his forearm. Not bad. He could still move. "Go!" he shouted, pointing toward the riverbank. "Now!" The war had demanded its price again. But this time, Mercer knew, deep in his bones, that some things were worth paying for. The woman hesitated only a second, then ran, slipping and scrambling down the slope. Mercer followed, firing blindly over his shoulder. A bullet slammed into the ground near his foot, spraying mud into his face. Then, suddenly, a new sound tore through the night, the deep, thunderous roar of engines. Tanks, American tanks, their cannons opened up, blasts lighting the forest like daylight, trees shattered. German fire faltered, then broke entirely. Shadows fled deeper into the woods, swallowed by darkness. Mercer collapsed behind the riverbank, chest heaving. His hands shook uncontrollably. It was over. Minutes later, Collins found him. The sergeant's face was streaked with grime and sweat, eyes blazing. He grabbed Mercer by the front of his jacket and yanked him to his feet. "What the hell were you thinking?" Collins shouted. "You run off like that again, you'll get yourself killed, and maybe the rest of us." Mercer met his gaze, breathing hard. They were civilians, Sarge. They were gonna die. Collins' jaw worked. For a moment, Mercer thought he might throw a punch. Instead, Collins pulled him into a rough, crushing embrace. "You stupid son of a bitch," Collins muttered. "You saved them." Medics moved through the aftermath, tending wounds, covering the dead with ponchos. Donnelly lay still by the road, eyes staring at the stars. Hayes sat nearby, hands bloody, shock written across his face. Mercer sat on the riverbank as a medic wrapped his arm. The woman approached hesitantly, baby held close. She knelt in front of Mercer again, tears streaming freely now. She pressed her forehead to his boot, sobbing. "No," Mercer said softly, lifting her up. "Don't." She looked at him, eyes full, and said the only English word she seemed to know. "Thank you." Mercer nodded, throat tight. Behind them, the tanks idled, engines rumbling like distant thunder. The road was littered with debris, smoke curling upward into the cold night sky. The fighting moved on the way it always did, suddenly, without ceremony. By morning, the road was quiet again. The tanks had rolled east before dawn, chasing a retreating enemy that no longer believed in its own cause. What remained behind was the wreckage. Scorched earth, shattered vehicles, and bodies laid out beneath ponchos, boots neatly aligned, as if order could still be imposed on chaos. Corporal Daniel Mercer stood near the riverbank, watching medics load the last of the wounded onto trucks. His arm throbbed beneath the fresh bandage, but it was a clean pain, something he could point to, something that would heal. The rest of him felt heavier. Private Donnelly was gone. They'd buried him at first light, a shallow grave marked with a rifle and helmet. Sergeant Collins had said a few words. Nothing fancy, just the truth. Donnelly had done his job. He died doing it. Somewhere back home, a telegram would arrive that could never explain what that meant. Mercer stared at the grave until Collins put a hand on his shoulder. "Trucks loading up," the sergeant said quietly. "We're moving out." Mercer nodded. As he turned, he saw her again. The German woman stood a short distance away with a small cluster of refugees, faces drawn, eyes hollow but alive. The baby slept against her chest, bundled in a blanket one of the medics had given her. When she saw Mercer, she hesitated, then stepped forward. She held something out. The photograph. Mercer shook his head. "Keep it." She pressed it into his hand anyway, closing his fingers around it. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside was a crust of bread, hard, broken, saved. "For you," she said softly. Mercer felt his throat tighten. He didn't want to take it. He knew what it cost her to offer. He took it anyway. "Take care of him," Mercer said, nodding toward the baby. She nodded, tears shining but not falling this time. Stronger now. Alive. As the trucks pulled away, Mercer sat in the back, watching the refugees grow smaller in the distance until they blended into the grey landscape of a country trying to remember how to exist without war. No one spoke for a long time. Hayes finally broke the silence. "You think it was worth it?" Mercer didn't answer right away. He looked down at the photograph in his hands. A man in uniform. A woman smiling once. A life that had existed before everything fell apart. "Yeah," Mercer said finally. "I do." Weeks later, the war in Europe officially ended. There were celebrations, shots fired into the air, men hugging each other, laughing and crying all at once. Someone found a bottle of wine. Someone else found a piano with half the keys missing. For one night, the weight lifted just enough to breathe. Mercer stood off to the side, watching, feeling something like relief and something like grief twist together inside him. Victory didn't feel like the movies. It felt quiet. It felt empty. Before he shipped home, Mercer walked past a small refugee camp on the edge of a town. Aid trucks rolled in and out. Red Cross banners flapped in the breeze. Children played with sticks and tin cans, laughter thin but real. He didn't expect to see her, but he did. She stood near a supply tent, healthier now, cheeks fuller. The baby, older, brighter-eyed, sat on her hip. When she saw Mercer, her face lit up in disbelief. She hurried over, words tumbling out in German he still didn't understand. But he didn't need to. She pressed the baby into his arms. Mercer froze, terrified he'd do something wrong. The baby stared up at him, then smiled, a real smile, wide and unafraid. Something inside Mercer broke open. The woman touched her own chest. "Hans," she said, then touched Mercer's arm. "Daniel." Mercer nodded, blinking hard. A photographer snapped a picture nearby, just another moment among thousands being captured as history moved on. An American soldier holding a German child. Once enemies. Now, just people standing in the wreckage, trying to build something that might last. Years later, back in Ohio, Mercer kept that photograph tucked inside a drawer. He never talked much about the war. Most men didn't. But sometimes, when his own children asked him what he'd done overseas, he didn't talk about the guns or the battles or the medals. He talked about a ruined town, a starving baby, and a choice. Because long after the shooting stopped, long after the uniforms were folded away, that was the moment that stayed with him. The moment he remembered what it meant to be human, even when the world had forgotten. And that, Mercer believed, was the real victory.